Ladies and gentlemen, we've done it! Now, what theory should I do for today? Oh, I know! Let's go back to one of our old theories! The good thing about being a theory channel is that I can get constructive feedback from you guys on what I discover in Breath of the Wild. Some of it's positive, some is negative, and then there is the eventual hate comments that every YouTuber will get, no matter what you do to prevent it. It's never possible to please everyone, but that shouldn't discourage you in any way from doing what you love. But I won't be talking about haters or anything. I also want to make it very clear that while people have had a negative opinion about my theories in the past, I don't see them as hating or anything. A lot of the time, these people bring up some very good points that I overlook in the game that significantly change the direction of a theory. And on a serious note, I really appreciate it as it'll help me become a lot better at what I do. It's also why I have no official schedule for theory videos, as that would lead to me trying to make connections of things that are just not there. But with all of the feedback comes those few people that end up helping and building the theory by bringing new information to my attention, which in return either ends up expanding on my video's theory or suddenly changing the entire outcome of it. And that's why I decided to create this video, since there is a certain old theory that I wanted to revisit. Partly because I didn't even cover everything I wanted to, and also because after looking at the comments, some of you have given me some very interesting thoughts and opinions that I would like to share with you guys today. So back in October, I had made a video talking about the 7 heroine statues residing in the Gerudo Wasteland, as well as a mysterious 8th atop of the Gerudo Highlands. I went through basically every single possible identity of the statues, and then ended off talking about the 8th. The main thing that was bugging me was the fact that, if the 8th was a mistake, then why did the Yiga clan have a total of 8 in their base? Now, I still am unsure of the answer to that, however there is plenty of information I hadn't covered in the first video that I want to go over now. You guys have also brought up your own different theories, and I would like to go over a few of them to see if we can finally solve this compelling puzzle. First of all, I need to start by bringing up a misconception that many people had regarding one of my statements in my previous video. In the end of the video, I brought up the idea of the statue hiding some sort of dungeon. This was just a random thought, however many people then told me how the DLC 2 footage of Zelda heading through a snowy region could have been them heading to the 8th Heroine. Well, I would like to agree with you, that is sadly not the Gerudo Highlands. It is actually quite obvious that this is the path to the flight range, as we see the shrine to the left as well as the lights for the flight range in the distance. So unfortunately, this probably won't have anything to do with the second DLC pack coming out this holiday. So with that said, let's actually get into the video. While I talked a lot about the 7 heroines last video, I only briefly mentioned the secret 8th one hidden in the Gerudo Highlands. And one of the biggest questions I left off the video with was, exactly who is this person? That will be one of the topics that I go over in this video. Now to start off, I'll be heading back to the Yiga clan hideout where we find all 8 statues. Before, I had been confused as to why the Yiga even had these in their base. But after some more research, I found out the super obvious answer. First of all, the statues here were definitely not created by them, and here's why. Going back to my previous video, I had translated the message written on the statues, and they read as followed. Gerudo, there is no strife. Gerudo, like water, we flow with life. And Gerudo, an unblemished desert flow, with the last word most likely being flower. Now, there are 2 important pieces of information to take away from this. Starting off, this was in Gerudo script. Since the Yiga clan are composed of Sheikah, they wouldn't be able to read or write in Gerudo script. Yeah, some of the Yiga clan could be composed of Gerudo, but I find that very unlikely. And second of all, these carvings translate to sentences talking about the Gerudo. If this was their base, then it wouldn't make much sense. So with this, we can conclude that these statues were created by Gerudo. That now brings up the question, why would the Gerudo create statues in the Yiga hideout? The answer is actually very simple. This place used to be used by the Gerudo at one time. Further evidence that the statues were made a long time ago is how the translation of the statue is cut off, showing that a lot of time has passed ever since they were created. Now, at first I thought this whole base was made by the Gerudo. However, looking more into the design of the base and what is within it, it is most likely that the Yiga clan made the rest of the base after taking over the area. And since at one time this wasn't a Gerudo base, it would have served another purpose. Judging by the layout of the room with giant statues and several lit torches with a pedestal in the middle, this is most likely a place of worship for the Gerudo. Remember, these guys took the 7 heroines very seriously. I mean, they created giant statues of each one, so clearly they held them in very high regard. So now the question is, why would the Yiga clan make their base here? If they despise the royal family because they were exiled by them, wouldn't they try to destroy these statues? I mean, it is very possible that the sword being broken off of one of the giant statues in the East Ruins was no accident. It could have been vandalism by the Yiga clan. Well, if you recall throughout the game, many different structures are covered with the Yiga insignia. This most likely is to represent their rejection of the Sheikah ways, and each statue has their face covered with the logo. By doing this, it simply represents them turning against the ideals of the royal family. Remember, they serve Ganondorf, and the sages of the Ocarina of Time were a part of the plan to seal him away at the end of the game. And since Ganon had at one time taken the form of a Gerudo, they might have purposely wanted to go out of their way to take over the Gerudo altar so that they could worship him. And this might be the reason why their biggest rival seems to be the Gerudo. After all, they appear to be worshipping the very people who had defeated Ganondorf in the distant past. As nice as it is to know this, it makes understanding the identity of the 8th Heroine more complicated. At first, it seems like the 8th Heroine could have just been someone who betrayed the sages and was kicked out. However, if the Gerudo created the statues, then why would they have one of this traitor? And that brings up the main question of this video. Who is the 8th Heroine? In reality, I already had an idea of it while making my previous video. However, I wanted to hear your opinions on the matter before bringing it up. And now it's time to finally look at this question. So from the information I've gathered, there are two possible choices and I'll be going over each one. And those are Link, specifically the Hero of Time from Ocarina of Time, and Ganondorf. Since the former is the first person that people will think about, let's start with him. If we go to the Gerudo Wasteland, the player will find a Hylian called Bozai. By talking to him, we can find out more information about the 8th Heroine. He states, "Everyone's heard the legend in the Gerudo region about the 7 heroines. But some tell of an 8th heroine, wiped clean from history, and no one knows why or how." Now, the first timeline you might think this represents is the adult timeline, since Link is sent back to the child timeline, thus no longer existing in the adult version. But the crazy thing is that the description of the 8th heroine matches all 3 different timeline splits. Let's go over each one. First, the adult timeline has Link go back to the child timeline once he defeats Ganondorf, quite literally wiping him from history. The following events in that timeline are then created in a version where the hero is no longer present, eventually leading once again to Hyrule's downfall. Second is the child timeline, where Link returns from the adult version to warn Zelda of Ganondorf's plans to claim the Triforce and lead Hyrule in ruin. He is given the Ocarina of Time to prevent Ganondorf from entering the Sacred Realm, and then leaves Hyrule in search for his friend, who we assume is Navi. He then ends up in Termina, a parallel universe where the events of Majora's Mask take place. In this timeline, Link could also be forgotten since he had left the land of Hyrule. In fact, he traveled to a whole other world. And finally, the Fallen Hero timeline. The timeline that might, let me just get a bit closer to my mic, might be the timeline that Breath of the Wild falls under. In this version, Link is defeated by Ganondorf and he obtains the full Triforce. This time, he was actually killed and therefore would no longer exist in this timeline. This means that the 8th Heroine's sword could represent the Master Sword that the Hero of Time once used. Another thing to point out is that while the sword for the 7 heroines is in the right hand, the 8th has it in her left, and Link in Ocarina of Time is left-handed. So with this logic, there is a very good chance that the 8th heroine is the Hero of Time. But one problem with this is that it would be implying that the 7 heroines are the ones in Ocarina of Time. And last time when I tried to match the sages to each of the wielded powers of the heroines, there were a few that didn't add up. This is how I matched it in the previous video. However, it resulted in me having to pair Zelda and Motion together. This didn't seem to fit, but after looking at some of your comments, there are a few possibilities to make this work. First of all, considering that some refer to Zelda as the Sage of Time, you could say that her power represents the motion of time. The next possibility was actually brought up by someone in the comment section going by the user Wayne Feener. While they kept skill, spirit, endurance, and gentleness the same, they assigned knowledge, flight, and motion to Zelda, Rauru, and Ruto. Knowledge to Zelda because she possesses the Triforce of Wisdom, as well as motion to Ruto representing the flowing motion of water both make sense. However, Rauru is an interesting one. I originally matched him up with knowledge because he was an ancient sage. This, as a result, would make him seem very wise. However, associating him with flight also makes sense. In Ocarina of Time, there is an owl that throughout your adventure will aid Link in his quest, giving him useful advice through the journey. And also can get kind of annoying. And according to the book Hyrule Historia, this is a form of Rauru. Going even further than this, there is a gossip stone that tells us more about him. They say the owl named Kaepora Gaebora is the reincarnation of an ancient sage. Since this is true, then Rauru could be matched with flight and it would make sense. While this problem can be explained, there are some issues that cannot. By looking at the quest log for the 8th heroine, it says the following. There's a legend about 7 heroines in the Gerudo region, but it turns out that an 8th heroine existed, and she is worshipped to this day by her faithful in the Gerudo Highlands. Currently, the only ones within the Highlands are the Yiga, so if the Yiga clan are the ones worshipping this heroine, then it would make no sense for it to be the Hero of Time. Yes, you could argue that Gerudo originally were the ones within the Highland. However, the quest log is very specific, saying that she is still worshipped to this day. However, there is one other possibility as to who this 8th heroine is, and it would fit with the issue that I just brought up. The person the Iga clan is loyal to, and that is Ganondorf. In the last video, I brought up the possibility of the 8th heroine being a sage until they were kicked out of the group for doing something bad. Obviously, the first person that you and I thought of was Ganondorf. Back in Ocarina of Time, he had pledged allegiance to the King of Hyrule while secretly planning to claim the Triforce for himself. He would end up doing this by entering the Sacred Realm once the Hero of Time had pulled out the Master Sword. For the next 7 years, Hyrule was ruled by him and monsters spread throughout the land. First of all, you will probably say that nowhere in the game is Ganon hinted at being a sage. And you would be entirely right about that. However, there is some information regarding the sages that can explain this. When you first meet Sheik, he says the following: "When evil rules all, an awakening voice from the sacred realm will call those destined to be sages, who dwell in the 5 temples." As it states in the game, before Ganondorf gets his hands on the Triforce, none of the sages are actually aware of the fact that they are, well, the sages. They only know after they are awakened. In fact, the only one who really seems to know this already is Zelda, the leader of the 7 sages. So it is entirely possible that Ganon was originally going to be a sage, but once he claimed the Triforce for evil intentions, he was banished without even being aware of it. Let's now go back to the 8th heroine. As I stated in the previous video, for some reason the text was reversed on the statue. After looking at a comment, it was revealed that the entire model was reversed. This could be symbolism to represent Ganondorf's betrayal of the other sages. In fact, if we go back to our first meeting with Zelda, she talks about a dream that she once had of dark clouds. While Ganondorf wasn't in this dream, she instantly concludes he was the one her dream was warning her about. So how would she know Ganondorf was bad? If he wasn't in the dream, it must have been something else. And if she was already aware that she was a sage, then perhaps she foresaw his betrayal? This is where things start to get interesting. Let's look at the actual Gerudo sage, Nabooru. When you meet her in the child timeline, she is very blunt about how much she hates Ganondorf. She also seems to be very aware of his evil intentions, and wants to break into the Spirit Temple in order to steal a treasure to ruin his plans. The one important piece of information, however, is how she is the most powerful Gerudo, second only to Ganondorf. Now, this is the part where I bring up another theory I had about the 8th heroine. Instead of originally having 8 and then one being kicked out, what if there were only 7 but one was replaced? Obviously in Ocarina of Time we have one race per sage. We got Kokiri, Goron, Zora, Sheikah, and Gerudo. The only one not to follow this rule are Hylian, as there are 2. So it is very possible that before this betrayal, Ganondorf was the original Gerudo sage. However, since he was banished, Nabooru took his place. And this makes me think that power is a very important factor when it comes to what Gerudo sage is chosen. Every 100 years, one man is born in the Gerudo race. This man is destined to be their king, meaning that he is the most powerful. So if the Gerudo sage is based on power, then if Ganondorf falls, the second in command would be the most suitable. Then if we consider the fact that Nabooru is the most powerful Gerudo, only second to Ganondorf, plus her desire to defeat him, then that would make her the best choice for a sage. In fact, when you awaken her as a sage, she says the following: "But isn't it funny that a person like me could turn out to be the sage's spirit?" The only other person to say something along the lines of this is Darunia, but while he says that it must have been Destinary? Is that even Destinary? Is Destinary even like a word? I don't know. But while he says that it must have been destiny, Nabooru seems the most surprised about being a sage. In fact, she had been under Ganondorf's control for 7 years, so she would have been awakened almost immediately without knowing it. Now, this still doesn't really explain why there would be a total of 8 statues in the old Gerudo base, so this theory still has a bunch of problems with it. So, the final verdict. Who do I think is the 8th heroine? Well, obviously, it could only be one person. One that has been wiped from history, but has a few worshipping him, and that is Tingle! Yeah, no. If I had to choose, I'd say the 8th heroine is the forgotten hero of time. In every single timeline, this is the one that would work. As cool as it would have been for Ganondorf to have been a sage, there are a few too many issues with that for my liking. But hey, it would make for a pretty cool alternate universe story. Someone get on that. But hey! That's just a theory. A Breath of the Wild theory. Thanks for watching. Now, if only I could bring myself to do that Mifa episode.